Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for hopping on. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for hopping on. We'll be getting started here about 11:02, 11:03 Pacific time, so the next 2 or 3 minutes. Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in the next minute or two. Hello, everyone active in the chat. Thanks for joining. We can go ahead and get started. I am Rebecca Bell, the marketing manager here at Critical Start. Before we get into the content for this session, I'm going to quickly review a few housekeeping items. You all should be muted here. If for some reason you're not, please just go ahead and put yourself on mute. That will help us reduce background noise and any interference during the presentation and demo portion of this event. We will have time for Q&A at the end of this session. You feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A functionality or through the chat, and we'll make sure that gets addressed. Now, today's Lunch and Learn, as you can see, is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to the recording there. And later this afternoon, you'll be receiving an email from Uber Eats with your $25 voucher. Like I said, that will be coming in the next hour or two after the event is over. That voucher will be valid through Wednesday, July 27th. So make sure you do that by next Wednesday, the 27th. Now let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. It's my honor to introduce our first speaker, Matthew Herring. He's our Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence and Detection Engineering at Critical Start. Matthew leads our cyber research unit. He provides timely and actionable intelligence, which allows for effective and accurate detections. This gives our customers an adaptive edge to protect themselves against the ever-changing threat landscape. And joining Matthew today is Charlie Smith. He is our product manager here at Critical Start. Charlie has extensive experience in the Microsoft security space, solutioning, implementing, and architecting Microsoft security tools for customers across the globe. As the Microsoft product manager, his primary focus is on all things Microsoft security, enriching and releasing new features for the Critical Start MDR customers. Now I'll pass it over to Matthew to get us started.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everybody. So real quick, just walking through what we're going to talk about today. So really the goal of this discussion is to dive into how threat actors are actually using this technique and a few of the underlying tactics in order to gain access to organizations. We'll walk through a few case studies as well as a couple of evasion techniques, and then follow up on how we at Critical Start are really helping to address the risks associated with phishing so you can go back to running your business. And so just as important as it is to detect and respond to phishing attacks, and we'll go into more on that later, this is really only the beginning. Our cyber research unit remains vigilant in order to understand how the threat landscape is evolving and then creating detections that are built to last, easy to triage, and hard for threat actors to bypass. We do this by focusing on the tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures employed by the adversaries, such as what we'll discuss during today's presentation. And so now why phishing? And so in its various permutations, phishing does continue to be one of the most effective ways for an adversary to gain initial access into their targeted organization. We look at a couple of different tactics used in order to achieve these goals. And so we see spearfishing links, we see spearfishing attachments, as well as spearfishing via service. And with a spearfishing link, we're seeing the link embedded in the body of the message. It may be a direct link, just a URL, might be like a click here type image, where it's really trying to impersonate like a Dropbox or a DocuSign or something like that. Many state-sponsored APT groups have been using phishing as a mechanism for initial access for various purposes. Russian APT group APT28, also known as Fancy Bear, used phishing lures in their attack against the DNC back in the 2016 election cycle, as well as against other governmental targets. Additionally, APT33, an Iranian threat group, has used phishing lures against various Saudi and US-based targets for intelligence against competitive interests, such as defense, petrochemical, aviation, and military industries. Spearfishing links have been used to distribute malware variants such as CACBOT and Emote, both known to be droppers of ransomware. And just as soon as we find ways to detect, actors are finding ways to bypass detection. Techniques include hosting on known legitimate shares like Microsoft Blob Storage, Google Drive, Dropbox, and then using ID and homoglyph attacks to try and obfuscate malicious pages. With spearfishing attachments, we see a little different approach there where the attachment, the malware is embedded in the email. So instead of having people browse to a link and inadvertently download content, it's directly in there. They're being asked to execute straight from the email. One notable example here is the Lazarus Group, who conducted the 2014 wiper attack against Sony Pictures in protest of the movie The Interview. Attachments will often exploit vulnerabilities, execute malicious code, or download secondary payloads for execution. And in this case, adversaries will often encrypt or password protect the documents in order to avoid detection. Alternatively, file extensions are changed to bypass detection of Office documents or executables. And so outside of the purview of a corporate email is spearfishing via service. Attackers oftentimes will gain rapport and execute phishing attacks through things like LinkedIn and WhatsApp. We've seen additional activity associated with an Iranian threat group that we will discuss later. And again, this helps them bypass corporate controls because oftentimes companies can't really defend against things like WhatsApp and LinkedIn. So it leaves that open as an attack vector for adversaries to get in and launch those attacks. Let's look at some of the numbers. Phishing exists because it works. And so according to the Proofpoint 2022 State of the Phish, 60% of companies that responded to the report reported data loss due to phishing. Additionally, 52% of organizations had credentials or accounts compromised. 47% were infected with ransomware. 29% were infected with malware, and then another 18% did experience some sort of financial loss. According to Cisco's cybersecurity threat trends report, 86% of organizations had at least one user click on a phishing link. According to the FBI IC3 Internet Crime Report in 2021, there were nearly 324,000 victims of phishing attacks, which is up nearly 35% from the previous year and 1,100% over the previous 5 years. So pretty massive increase in the amount of phishing attacks that have been observed. So email isn't the only platform. Business email compromise and smishing are also significant risks. In this case, an adversary will often pose as an authority figure, a leadership figure in an organization, in order to try and abuse that title in order to gain trust and have employees wire money or purchase gift cards. This is serious business. According to the 2021 FBI IC3 Internet Crime Report, business email compromise resulted in nearly $2.4 billion of losses in 2021, with nearly 20,000 complaints to the IC3. In this case, as you can see, even security companies can be targeted. This is a screenshot of an actual BEC attempt against me. In this case, this is just me messing with the attacker, just trying to have a little bit of fun, get them riled up, waste a little bit of their time. No harm was done in the course of this smishing attack. And so it's not all gift cards and credential hacking. So let's review some case studies and how these tactics are actually applied in the wild. We're going to start off first with the well-known malware variant that saw revival in late 2021 after being taken down earlier that year. And so back in 2014, Emote came on the scene initially as a banking Trojan, targeting German and Austrian banks. Over the years, it's evolved into a dropper for other payloads. In April of 2021, the Emote botnet was taken down through a coordinated international effort. Nearly a year later, we saw reemergence of the group's malware. In this case, the primary means of distribution for Emote is via malicious mail using a tactic known as thread hijacking, where an infected machine will respond to threads and distribute to contacts in an established email service in order to send that payload. In past cases, we've seen Emote being leveraged to distribute ransomware, such as Conti and Ryuk. So the reemergence of this particular malware is quite concerning. The Quantum Group, which is formed in Conti's ashes, have also been observed using Emote. Researchers have also identified Emote shifting away from the malicious macro-enabled documents in favor of a shortcut or LNK files to execute a PowerShell script in order to download and install the Emote. This approach bypasses common controls in Office documents and email filters in order to improve the potential for execution in the original document. In early 2022, over 2 million cases of Emote have been confirmed. It just really demonstrates just how widely utilized this particular malware can be. So real quick anatomy of an attack, use of a distribution mechanism for this malware. We see the attack chain starting with a malicious email message containing that malicious file. Once executed, Emote will pull down other malware such as Cobalt Strike or Qbot. This is a common delivery mechanism for ransomware. Another instance that we're seeing is Black Basta, which is also believed to be an offshoot from the now defunct Conti gang. And so phishing campaigns are an often utilized tactic for initial access brokers whose business model relies on acting as a reseller for ransomware operators and affiliates. In March this year, the Google Threat Analytics Group identified a named group with close ties to the recently splintered Conti organization. This group belongs to that subcategory of actors known as initial access brokers. In the cybercrime marketplace, these are groups that are focusing on gaining a foothold into an organization, and then they sell that access to other groups, including ransomware as a service, operators, and affiliates. The attack pattern for this group remained consistent while being tracked by Google tag. A couple of things they noticed: registering a domain to spoof a legitimate domain, oftentimes using a different top-level domain such as a .us, .co, or a .biz. Creating fake employee accounts under the spoof domain. Following gathering of target emails, the actor would then send a phishing message using business proposals or scheduling meetings in order to establish credibility. And then following, sending a file sharing notification with that desired payload. Initially, the group created fake personas of employees at real companies using AI-generated fake profile pictures. They later impersonated real company employees by copying personal data from social media and business databases. Analysis of the communications performed by the Google Threat Analytics group indicated what we would consider kind of a normal working hours or a normal schedule, something akin to like a 9 to 5. Distribution of the communications indicated that they may have been working from like a Central or an Eastern European time zone. Their payloads included malicious documents used to exploit a Microsoft MS HTML vulnerability, and they were later identified to have shifted to using the Bizarre Loader malware. Additionally, the use of a custom Cobalt Strike profile did provide further evidence of the ties between Exotic Lily and the Conti group. And so moving over to Fancy Bear. June 23rd, 2022, Threat Post reports an emerging campaign associated with this threat actor. In this case, the campaign leveraged fears over a suspected or concern over a nuclear attack from Russia against Ukraine, based off of some of the comments from Vladimir Putin, identifying that he was putting his nuclear forces on high alert, really keeping people on edge there. And in this case, it was a malicious RTF document titled "Nuclear Terrorism is a Very Real Threat." So really playing on those fears in order to get execution of those documents. This particular document utilized the recently disclosed vulnerability in the Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool, CVE 2022-30190, which is dubbed as Felina by the security researchers. This particular document would pull down a second stage, which used a JavaScript to load and execute an embedded an encoded PowerShell script. The PowerShell script then would load a malicious credential stealer used to collect usernames, passwords, and URLs from several popular browsers. And so we're going to move over and talk a little bit about business email compromise. In this case, the largest known BEC fraud campaign to date, conducted against Facebook and Google between 2013 and 2015. An individual by the name of Evaldas Ramasakas defrauded Facebook and Google of approximately $121 million in collective losses. After setting up a fake company, he and his associates presented these companies with convincing invoices in which payments were remitted to bank accounts controlled by this individual. In addition to the invoices, they provided fraudulent lawyers' letters and contracts to ensure that the banks accepted those payments. The bottom line here is that people really do want to help, and these types of campaigns will exploit their willingness to do so. And so as an organization, well-defined, thoroughly communicated processes with executive support and senior leadership support are really the best defenses against business email compromise. And so moving on to APT 34. So let's talk about spearfishing via service. According to research from Mandiant in June of 2019, activity associated with APT 34, which is an Iranian threat group, targeted industries operating in the Middle East. Mandiant's assessment here was that the strongest interest was to gain access to financial, energy, and government entities. In this case, the actors utilized academia or job offers in order to help them gain trust from their targets. In this instance, the link in the message points to a download of the tone deaf malware, which was a backdoor that allowed collection of system information, file uploads and downloads, as well as arbitrary command shell execution. Also observed during analysis of the capability of DNS tunneling as means for exfiltration. This really goes to show that phishing and mouse spam can happen outside of sources of corporate email, and the purview of security and a higher level of vigilance used for accounts that may be outside of the scope and purview of these controls. So over the last few months, Critical Start CRU has been tracking the reemergence of a campaign named Bizarre Call, where actors plan a campaign against major American companies in banking, healthcare, finance, manufacturing, defense, and energy. This tactic was originally observed in 2020, 2021, and was used by the Ryuk and Conti ransomware groups. In this particular campaign, actors are sending malicious emails with a phone number to call, oftentimes posing as an expired subscription. Upon contact, the victims are pointed to a download site where they download and install a malicious Zoho remote access assistant and monitoring tool. From there, the actors will go on and install Cobalt Strike in order to move laterally and then deploy their final payload. And so let's talk briefly about some evasion techniques. And so in this case, sometimes what you see isn't necessarily what you get. And so take a moment and try and spot the fake here. Which one of these is a fake domain? And so what we refer to as homoglyphs can be used to bypass human detection and actually trick users into thinking that links and emails may be legitimate. In this case, what we see here, while the visible characters are the same, the ASCII values for the Cyrillic characters are actually different from their Latin counterparts. And so as highlighted in red, we have yay, and O, which are part of that Cyrillic alphabet used to replace the Latin characters. And so defined in 2003, RFC 3492 defines the standards for Punycode, which allows for the usage of internationalized domains for the internet host names. In this case, the XN prefix indicates a domain is being converted to a Punycode sequence. This is really an opportunity for the general public to identify potential usage of ID and homoglyph attacks. And so while it helps, it's not necessarily foolproof. In 2017, security researcher Chudong Zhang discovered that modern browsers actually wouldn't translate IDNs if the domain was registered and only in foreign characters. And so what we see here, which has since been translated with patching of some of these browsers, was a spoofed Apple domain that at the time wouldn't render in the browser as Punycode. This has since changed. Now modern browsers actually do fully translate this domain into Punycode. And so while an edge case, what it really does show is that a degree of vigilance can really help to catch suspicious behavior. And so real quick, we'll discuss MFA bypass. And so in this particular attack, attackers will collect those rolling authentication codes and then actually replay them to gain access to legitimate resources. The attacker will start by sending out their malicious email. Once received, the victim browses to the phishing site. And as many cloud-based single sign-on solutions are publicly available, attackers can then look at what the corporate branding is and then add the necessary images to make them look more convincing. Once the password is entered, it's saved for the attacker's use. And then the user is prompted to add their multi-factor token. Following this sequence, the attacker now has the password and the rolling token and can use these factors to quickly authenticate to the service. They do have to quickly replay these credentials, but it is possible for them to use those tokens in order to gain access to legitimate resources, such as like an Office web access or office.com. Alternatively, with push notifications, users can be tricked into accepting a fraudulent request. This may be because of just the timing of a pop-up notification as the threat actor tries to authenticate, or through a brute force where the users are eventually enticed to just stop the noise and accept the fraudulent requests. And so, yes, attackers can be tricky and there are ways to bypass protections, but there are effective ways to stop that threat. And so while I turn it over to Charlie to talk about some of these solutions, we're going to go ahead and kick off a little poll. While we do that, Charlie, did you want to talk about some of these protections?
Yeah, so yeah, if we're looking at the slide here, if we start from the right and work ourselves to the left. So on the far right, we've got the X, the red X. It's ways we can disrupt the threat actor. And we can do that with Azure conditional access. We can also do it through Azure's identity protection, right? Which is evaluating those Azure AD sign-ins in real time, right? It's looking for like, hey, a sign-in from a malicious IP, or hey, this sign-in has some unfamiliar properties on it, right? Like we haven't seen this type of property on the sign-in within the last 30 days. So for example, like maybe I come from a Windows device, 30 days out of the month, and all of a sudden I log in from a Linux box, right? That is unfamiliar about that sign-in, so we get triggered alerts. So as an organization, right, you can put in a policy to kind of state anything that hits like a low, medium, or high type risk. You can enforce multi-factor authentication. You can enforce a password reset. You can even do, like I said, conditional access policies, which says, hey, based on these conditions, maybe you come from a hybrid join device, maybe pass MFA as well, and then we'll let you access your mail. Or you could say, hey, if you're coming from an unknown location, maybe we redirect you to more of a read-only, which is using Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, right? You can do a reverse proxy with it to say you get a read-only view of SharePoint or your mail, etc. So that's pretty obtainable for a lot of people, but kind of moving to the left, right, a little bit more mature practice, which is like passwordless. One of my favorite ways to compromise an account is through email. I like to capture their username and password, but oftentimes it's they have MFA on the account. For me, as a trying to compromise the account, for me, it's not the end all be all, right? Let's be honest. I know everyone here on the call has at least seen a user approve an MFA request to get through. Yes, MFA absolutely kind of knocks down some of the unsophisticated attacks, but I just inundate the user, right? I just keep pounding on them until I'm pretty relentless, and they'll approve it. And then I'll pull out my burner phone and I'll set up MFA on their account, and then I can get in and out. Well, how do we prevent some of that? Well, what you see here in that screenshot, right? It has a number on it. So as a threat actor, even if I have the username and password, I can't inundate you anymore. From your phone, right, you get listed like a couple different numbers, and it has to match the one that's being presented on the screen. So on my phone, it maybe have like a selection of like maybe 12, the number 12, the number 80, 13 and 7. Well, I have to put in the 80 in there, and it lets me through. And the far left is a little bit more mature, in my opinion, which is using like a Yubico USB device, right? I plug it into the device, and that essentially authenticates me. But the good thing is there's a path forward, no matter where you're at in this model. But like kind of Matthew said earlier, right? These threat actors are very clever. there's always new ways. In fact, Matt, on his team, right, the cyber research unit, and that's what they do. They're always tracking different threat actors. But there's some new stuff, new campaign stuff that has been released. Matthew, do you mind kind of jumping into that and talking about like some of the recent stuff that you guys have uncovered and some of the news that you guys have been researching?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is hot off the presses as of, I think, just about a week ago. Back on the 12th of July, Microsoft announced a phishing campaign using a technique known as Adversary in the middle that they had been tracking since September of 2021, which targeted more than 10,000 organizations. In this case, the lure used spoofed Office 365 login pages to trick users into providing passwords and even allowing authentication through MFA. And so using this tactic, attackers were using malicious pages to actually proxy those requests and then stealing the session cookie as it traversed back to the user. From there, that session cookie was used to authenticate the attacker to legitimate services. In this case, specifically Outlook web access. In the campaign, the adversary would look for targets by searching for finance-related emails, and then would set up a rule to hide activity from the victim, marking messages as read and then moving to an archive while they conducted their fraudulent operations. And during this window, while they were working in the individual's mailboxes, they would respond to emails from within the organization to try and solicit fraudulent payments. Again, conditional access policies here are a very effective countermeasure. Anti-phishing technologies will also help in prevention. Another thing for operations teams, they should be continuously hunting in their SIMs and various consoles in order to look for strange mailbox activity, such as unusual rule creation or auto forwarding. So let's talk a little bit about critical Start MDR. I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, who is our subject matter expert here, as he walks through the service and then how we integrate tightly with the Microsoft suite in order to better protect our customers. So Charlie, take it away.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so on this slide, kind of starting from left to right. So if you're a customer and having some challenges with email phishing, here's some of the ways we do detection, how we respond, how we investigate. So the tool itself, so let's say in this case, Microsoft Defender for Office, right, has a lot of great detections. So we got an email, it looks fishy, it is fishy, we have a detection. Either the user submitted the email as phishing, right? Either the user clicked on the URL and we got a detection that says, hey, user clicked on a malicious URL link. Or it was later at the time of delivery, right? It was there was no threat intel on the emails bad, but later we found it was bad. Maybe MDO did, and they had some recommendations. So, some of the stuff has, let's be honest, false positives. So that goes into our platform, ZTAP, and we go through there and we're looking for all the false positives. And what is not a false positive, that it looks slightly off, slightly different, ultimately goes into our SOC for investigation. And from there, we know that when we're looking at a potential phishing email, there's other criteria, there's other context, information, data points that we need. So we use API queries to extract some of that data. So we plug into Microsoft 365 Defender, we plug in the Graph API, there's a whole bunch of APIs that we call on. So we will grab the SMTP header of the email because we want to know some certain information about it. Did it pass SPF, DKIM, DMARC, the tool detected, so forth. But we also look at, well, was there any other behavior on the account that we should be aware of? They got this phishing email. Did we see any impossible travels on the account? Did we see a mass download on the account? So we get curious and want to know more about it. And from there, we can take response actions. We can, from the mobile SOC app, right? So what we do for in our SOC analysts, the ZTAP platform, and our customers have access to it. So those are obviously our SOC, but we can also perform the same actions and investigation from our mobile app called Mobile SOC, and we have response action. So we can, if we find it bad, the email as fishy, we can remove the email, not just out of the user's mailbox, but out of the environment. We can also provide end user feedback, especially around user submitted phishing emails. So if I'm a user, I think it's fishy. Sometimes it goes in a black hole and no one ever hears anything about it, but we can send a response back like, hey, thank you very much for that email. By the way, it was fishy, thank you. And we removed it. And oh, by the way, sysadmin at company, we found an override in place and that was allowed. We recommend to remove that override. We can also perform actions on the account itself, right? We can confirm the account is risky with an identity protection, which can follow your policies. Maybe it's a password reset, maybe it's enforce a MFA prompt, but we can also disable the account and revoke session tokens. Depending on the rules of engagement, right? You don't have to let us delete emails, you don't have to let us disable accounts. It's all up to you, what you want us to do or not, but our preference is that, hey, we can take it for you. So we kind of talked about the landscape here. I'd rather just kind of show you an example within our platform of like how a SOC analyst actually goes about it. So let me do that right now. Let me get the share screen. All right. And just let me know if you guys can see this. It's gonna be quick.
And we are good to go, Charlie. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. So here we are, we're logged into our platform, ZTAP. So what you're looking at is what our SOC analysts would use to investigate an alert. In this case, it's an email phishing. It's the same one our customers can use this too, right? We don't have a different portal for a customer. It's all the same. So here we are, we have a alert called email reported by a user as malware phish, and John Doe is the one that submitted it. This is modeled. This is a lab environment, so it doesn't have real data, obviously, but this is modeled after ones that we have seen for our customers. So as a SOC analyst, I want to know more about the email before I want to take action. So we have all these API queries that we can run to get more data, right? So in this case, I want to know more information about the mail message. Reason being, I just want to know at an email security hygiene, is it even following best practices, right? So I want to look at SPF, DKIM, and DMARC really quick, right? SPF, did it pass or fail, right? Can the sender's IP address, is it allowed to send as this email domain? In this case, it said none. From our standpoint, none is almost equal as fail. If anybody's exchanging email on the internet, you should have an SPF record. Is this malicious? Not quite yet, but definitely suspicious. We'll keep moving on. We see with DKIM, it wasn't DKIM signed, not necessarily a red flag. Not everybody's at the maturity level of DKIM signing all their emails, no big deal. DMARC, we see none. Again, not everyone has a DMARC record out there yet, although recommended. We'll keep moving on. So because SPF, this looks a little suspicious to me. Next I want to look at is the to from fields, the number 2. So as you guys know, every email has 2 from addresses, right? In the Microsoft world, they call it the P1 sender and the P2 sender. So this is what is not presented to the end user. The P2 sender is. This is typically what it gets spoofed here, right? So although the P1 and P2 sender, if they don't match, it's not, so Salesforce, ServiceNow, right, will often have the P1 sender something different. It'll be like something at salesforce.com, but maybe the display name, this display of the user, could be something different. That's okay. But we want to take a look at it because we have actually seen, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, about a month ago now, we saw there was a college, a student's account was compromised. So the threat actor compromised the account and was using this student's account to run all their campaigns from. So it was SPF did pass, it was DKIM signed, and DMARC was also passed. P1 sender, right, came from the student's email address. And same thing with the P2 sender. You know what was different and off on it? Was the display name. You know, Matthew touched on it, right? People trying to impersonate a different user. And with this, in that case, if it said it came the student's name first, dot last name at the college domain, the threat actor changed it to IT admin, and that was enough for us to take action on it. So in this scenario, not super suspicious yet, but we'll keep moving on. One of the questions we always have is, did MDO detect it in the first place, right? Did Microsoft Defender find anything wrong with it? And in this case, it absolutely did, right? The threat, it was phish. It wasn't just any kind of phishing email. It was a high confidence phish. And here's the detection methods, right? We've seen a URL based on the URLs embedded in the email look bad. Also, we were seeing some cross-org spoofing as well. So really at this point, as a SOC analyst, I'm kind of scratching my head like, okay, the user submitted as phishing, MDO found it as bad. We have intelligence that the SPF record was none. Like this is not adding up well. But why did it land in the user's inbox? Why did it get there? So I'm looking at overrides at this point. And we can see that, right? Through our API queries, we fetch certain criteria to get more data and context. And we see, and this is fairly common, unfortunately, but we saw an override under Exchange Online and their connection policy. This could be a transport rule. This could be an anti-spam policy where they accidentally added, we've seen it before. A customer added a gmail.com and guess what? It doesn't matter if it's MDO, Proofpoint, Mimecast. If you put a loud list in there, a loud listing, it'll still add the metadata to it to say it's bad and here's why it's bad, but we'll always honor the override. And that's what, I'll deliver it. And that's what happened here is that a sysadmin went in, modified the connection policy and allowed it. So at this point, as a SOC analyst, I have high confidence that this is absolutely a phishing email. I can also delete the email. So this would not, like I said, I mentioned earlier, this is not only going to delete the email out of the user's mailbox here, but out of the entire environment, right? We want to neutralize the threat. If we ever have to, we can restore it. We can put the email back to the way it was, but we can also fetch the message ID. Although we're going to remove the email out of the threat, but we can also run a query against the customer's environment and ask, hey, based on this network message ID, like what is the blast radius? Like where else did this go? And we could fetch the data by fetching the network message ID and see where it delivered. Is it only impacting this user? Is it all these people? Because that means something, right? Wouldn't you as a customer want to know like who else was potentially affected by this? Like I know for us, it is important. So, if we have to, maybe a part of the response that our customers want us to do, we can come in here, like we said, we can disable the account. We can get other information about the account activity. Are there other alerts around it? So we can get a whole lot of context out of a single pane of glass here to be able to fetch all the data that we need. All right. So that kind of concludes our demo of how we treat email phishing from a SOC perspective. I kind of want to turn it back to everyone in the call here about like, would you guys want to learn more about our offering and other capabilities that we have? And I believe Rebecca's going to put a poll. Yep, here we are, MDR poll. Stop sharing. So with that said, is there any other questions that anybody on the call has for us right now?
One question that we got, and there's still plenty of time, folks, if you have a question, put it in the chat or in the Q&A. The one question we got is, how do I respond when a user is phished?
Matthew, I can take that one first, or if you want to. I think we got
Go ahead and kick it off, Charlie.
Yep. So the minimum is remove the threat, right? So you want to remove the email first out of the system. So let's just get that out of the way. The second step is to, if the user is clicked on the URL or we want to take action on the account, right? We want to disable the account, revoke session tokens, and reset the password. And then, if it was a payload on the endpoint, we typically want to do a host isolation. So at a very high level, like that's kind of my knee-jerk reaction, like, hey, at minimum, these are the process and procedures that we can put in place. Matthew, what about you?
Yeah, so I always like to go back to established frameworks and methodologies. So what I typically kind of lean on is the NIST incident response framework. So making sure with regard to like preparation that you've got the controls in place to detect and respond to these. And then, yes, when the user is phished, focused on containment. So, neutralizing that user, isolating the host, validating access to apps is cut off, really eliminating that account or that identifier's ability to cause further damage. And then, from a remediation standpoint, that's where you're really pivoting on identified command and control, identified samples and things like that as part of the indicators of compromise that are collected during that investigation. And then from there, really once you finish up, you've kicked them out, you've got everything squared away, then you go back and you do your post-incident activities. And that's where you're running your post-mortems, you're writing up your incident reports and really sharing back with interested parties, stakeholders, leadership on the root cause of that incident to try and see what controls can be adjusted, what additional investments may need to be made in order to better protect the organization from similar types of attacks moving forward.
Awesome, fantastic. We just got a question from Bill. When it deletes the message from a user's email, does the user even know they got a compromised email?
Good question. So when we get two options, we can do it with a notification and we can do it without the notification. So we have some customers, like we don't want our end users to know that we performed an action. So that's option one. Option two is like, yes, we want to know when action is taken. So we can escalate. So we can take action and escalate it to you or the security team. Say, hey, we took action. And we can also send a notification to the end user, let them know we took action.
Awesome, great. And then we got another one. How does Critical Start respond when an email is marked as phishing?
So when an email is marked as phishing, so we're looking at not only in our IOCs, but also our indicators of compromise, but also the built-in tool itself in its detection. So we're making sure that your environment at a baseline is configured where the detections can happen, and also with our IOCs. So once we get that right, as mail is flowing through, that's triggering potential alerts, which goes into our platform, ZTAP, and then we're doing our investigation from there. If we need to, we can pivot into the customer's console, but typically that's not always needed based on all the features and settings that we created within our platform.
Awesome. Perfect. Any other questions? We do have Dan with his hand raised. So Dan, I'm going to give you the ability to talk. If you have a question and you want to ask it, feel free. Oh, Dan's hand is down. No more questions. Give it a minute or two. Oh, we just got another one. Oh, no worries, Dan. Perfect. Well, those are all of our questions for today, gentlemen. We can give you all about 12 minutes back in your day. So thank you so much to everyone for attending this Lunch and Learn. We hope you found it very valuable. Thank you to Matthew and Charlie so much for sharing such great content. Be on the lookout for an email from Uber Eats. I'll be sending that out in the next 30 minutes or so with your $25 voucher. And we'll also be sending tomorrow a link to this recording. If you have any questions in the interim, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on the Critical Start team. And again, thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.